my killer thing that's missing, and I know it's what I have to explain because first it sounds very funny. PowerPoint. We need the equivalent of PowerPoint in this space. And when I say the equivalent of PowerPoint, I really mean the equivalent. What is PowerPoint about? PowerPoint is about there's someone who is driving the experience. There's someone who is changing between slides, and there are people who are watching it, and they can annotate it, they can talk about it, and so on. And that person also talks about it who is the presenter. This is what PowerPoint is. Yes, it might be slides, it might be present. It's different vendors have different solutions for this, but more or less the whole experience haven't changed since this whole slide idea has been designed. Actually, if you think back 40 years ago, you were putting those foils onto the projector. It hasn't really changed since that. This spatial computing thing that we are having today is a way for us to change this experience. Instead of you having a 2D image, instead of you having even a 3D image, you would have experiences. One experience might be a map where things will show as small icons, and you can take an icon and look into a factory and see how things are happening. It might be a 3D chart, but then you can take a copy of your chart and start interacting with it and get additional data of it. Each of these experiences can be bespoke for what is happening there and how it is happening. So my killer app is the spatial version of what PowerPoint is, or what PowerPoint can be. And there has been some startups who got close to it, but they either failed and not existing anymore, or they pivoted. So there were companies like Glue or Spatial IO and so on. We did have this kind of approach that you had a wall that you could do this storytelling and with this experience and everything, but then they later in pivoted, or in case of Glue, they have gone bankrupt. The reason I know you is because you guys have something that might fit this kind of issue, that might be a solution for it and provide a kind of experience which in some way or the other might be similar to what spatial neuromorphic reimagination of PowerPoint experience could be.
I'm Metaverse!
Welcome back to another episode of Metaverse, where we talk with business leaders and founders of agencies and startups about innovative technologies, mostly around spatial computing and artificial intelligence. Today's guest has been around the space for a very long time, innovating through different waves of hype cycles and lulls, and he's kind of seen it all. He's a metaverse and spatial computing development practices lead at a large investment bank. We've got Peter Smulovics here with us today. Peter, thanks so much for joining. Maybe we could start by just learning a little bit about your story. Like, how did you get involved in XR in the first place?
Wow, so I am one of the old ones when it comes to XR. So the first time I was dealing with XR was 40 years ago. So, and yeah, I know I am dating myself. So it was still using those red and blue glasses, if you remember those. And we were using very non-innovative computers, very innovative at that time. So we were using like Commodore machines and things like this to display very rudimental, but using 3 colors, actually 4 colors. You were using black, you were using blue, you were using red and purple. And just using these 4 colors, and one of these glasses you could get from your cereal box or from a comic book back and everything. Although after a while, I managed to find a retailer who were selling those celluloid in big things. So I was actually creating these glasses after a while myself. So I was cutting the glasses, gluing together and giving to people to try out the experiences I was creating. So I started this thing much earlier than many of the people. So it wasn't really anything at that time. At the same time, it was actually much better than some of the experiences we have today. In what sense? You had the social factor. Everybody was in the room, everybody was wearing these glasses, and everybody saw the experience at the same time. So in this sense, it was ahead of its time. In the other sense, it was much more behind this time. And then I went through all those different cycles. So I worked with companies who try to do these kind of experiences using a screen. displaying things, trying to do lenticular displays and so on. I worked at Microsoft, where next to a lot of things, I worked on the Surface Table. If you remember the Surface Table, that was that funny device. You could put objects on it and it recognized those objects, and you could like reorder your beer and these kind of things. If you go to Las Vegas today, some casinos still have the second version of these devices out there. And I even worked on the HoloLens as well. So I went through this whole experience of trying to do these devices, trying to look it from the software side, from the hardware side, how these two things can merge. And since then, I have been presenting about different topics in this area, different conferences. I presented at the Prism conference. I presented at the Full Circle conference, EVICE conference. I presented at the open source forum. I presented at the Virara event series and a lot of other places. I presented about what I think about it and where this thing. And when I say this thing, I'm very careful. So I'm not calling it yet either XR, MR, AR, VR, because I have my own feeling about this whole thing, how I look at this whole thing. So I will leave it to the next question. But to answer your question, I have been looking into this tech and I have been working with this tech for quite a while. And I consider myself an expert in it. I mean, you can never be the expert in something, but I consider myself someone who has tried, seen, and done a lot of things with this tech.
If anyone can call them an expert in this, Peter, I think you're
Oh,
one of
come
the
on.
few that could that's actually deserving of that tag. You've been through it all, man. And it's interesting. I feel like this is an industry where there's this constant state of feeling that we're just not quite there. Like everyone always is like in 2 years. And there was this great talk from Jeremy Dalton at PwC at AWE this year, where he talks through the history of like the last 1,000 years of people thinking about virtual world building. And a couple hundred years ago in the 1800s, we had a stellidoscope, I think is what it was called, but it was basically an eye on one lens, an eye on another lens, and then a picture split into two pictures. And it looks just like the Google Cardboard looked, where we put our phones in the little slot.
I do have some Google Cardboards laying around me. So yes, it's like the old version of Google Cardboards. Original days were hand-painted things. So you had small hand-painted pictures yet that you put into this thing. Then around 100-ish years ago, they started to use small actual photographs, when photography happened and everything. The humanity was always interested in tales, in storytelling. And, very quickly we figured out how you can tell a story to your ears. The whole idea of being able to record the voice, being able to play back the voice, and so on. It became something you take granted. You go outside the street, if you see someone without something in their ear, you feel like, wow, that guy is strange, is not listening to something on the street. Same way, we haven't really conquered the other senses. We don't wear something on our nose to override the sense that you feel there. And the same way, we are not wearing yet something on our eyes all the time to override or augment what you actually see. At the same time, I have been reading this article that we are in the, I don't know, the 2003 of mobile computing with spatial computing. We are in the 2007 of mobile computing. And I'm like, we don't even know where the whole thing is heading. So being able to compare it to mobile computing, I think it's far too early. I mean, there's a lot of parts of this, whether it's legal, whether it's compliance, security, ethical questions, and so on, that we have to figure out first before we can say that, oh yeah, same way as mobile phone, billions of people are going to use this tech. We are not, eventually we will arrive there. So I believe one day we will look back this whole thing and we will say, oh, there was a generation we didn't have these devices yet.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It's like if we keep saying we're 2 years away for hundreds and hundreds of years, like are we really 2 years away, or is it just a constant inevitable thing that humanity is moving towards, that we just keep inching closer and closer towards, and like overcoming more and more barriers, making it better and better? Something I'm really curious to ask you about, because I think that there's hobbyists in this space, like people that just enjoy VR, like VR gamers, for example. And that's how I started personally. Like I played some VR games and was the local VR guy that was putting headsets on people in my neighborhood all the time, right?
Yeah.
And then there's people who work in the space who either you know, work on building technological platforms, or they're 3D designers designing assets and worlds and whatnot, like building digital twins. And then you've got people on the business side that are kind of navigating the politics internally and getting these programs off the
Mhm.
ground and identifying real business pain points that these technologies can solve for. So when you started, it seems like at first it was like an enthusiastic interest in the
Yeah.
technology. At what point did you end up blending that interest in XR technologies into like your professional
So
career?
we go back on my t-shirt somewhere here. So let's say we are
I
a bit.
love the t-shirt, by the way. It's
Yeah,
so
it's,
good.
it's, it's the evolution of everything from Abacus to wearing a HoloLens. So it's a fun t-shirt. But I'm going back to the ENIAC. You remember the ENIAC? Big machine, cubes and everything. It's really going back in time. That time, nobody was thinking they would need a computer at home. Best if they were thinking they will have a terminal access a central computer. Uh, that was the time where probably depends on the country you were where you were somewhere between 40 to 60 years ago, when people started to saying, I do have access to a computer at work, I have the shared time, either I'm using punch cards or I already better technology and so on, I want to have a computer at home. This demand was created by the feeling that I could then do my bookkeeping at home using this. I could track my, if you were a farmer, you could track those things there. So, then people started this whole, then the internet came, and everything changed, of course, and everybody wanted to have a machine to be able to join and everything. So that was one of the big changes. Why I'm saying it? When it came to mobile computing, mobile phones, tablets, and everything, it happened the other way around. You had your mobile phones at home, you had your tablets at home, and you were thinking, if I have these at home, why I cannot use these devices at work?
Do you think part of why that, because I think it's combining two ideas, right? Like that you already had the computer at work and then you already had the phone at home. And so it was kind of this blending of like, oh, this is just like what I have at work, but it's more convenient. And so people were able to kind of connect the dots between the two, right?
Yeah, and when it comes to spatial computing, we don't yet know which direction is going to happen. Will there be a breakthrough and somebody will create the ultimate killer app for one of these devices? I don't know which vendor is going to create it. I do have some ideas what the killer app for me would be, uh, but
Well, let's dive into that. What would
oh,
the
I
killer
get
app
to
be
that.
for you, Peter?
Somebody can build it for me. So, but the main point is that we don't know which direction it will happen. Will it be something people already been using at home and they say, hey, suddenly I want to use this technology at work? Or it would be the other way around. Oh, I have been using this technology at work. Why I cannot start using it at home? We don't know which way it's going to happen, but I feel like it will happen either way. It's not like it will organically happen at both places at the same time. If we look at the different devices, if we look at, for example, Meta, they are coming from the more gaming, more the end consumer approach. If you look at the Microsoft HoloLens, they clearly were targeting the enterprises and so on. When it comes to, for example, the Apple headset, they actually try to be somewhere in between. They are very close to enterprises and work with enterprises, but at the same time, it's clearly a consumer device and it's clearly considered like a V1 device in some ways. So I'm not going into rumors and everything, but we who use the device and are using the device, we consider it a V1 device. We guess there's going to be at least one or if not more generation which would fix some of the issues that we have seen with the first one.
So let's talk about the Apple Vision Pro for a second, because I think
Sure.
it's a really interesting device. To your point, it kind of blends these two worlds really nicely. Like people talk about the price point being high and like it being this kind of like high end device, but I think that it's hitting two things, right? Like one, it's hitting a luxury consumer, So like consumers that are willing to spend a few $1,000s already on a MacBook, it's not quite as scary for their audience to be able to spend $4,000 on a really fancy gadget for their house. And then on the other side, for enterprise use cases, if it's really providing enough value to businesses, I mean, a couple of plane tickets to travel internationally and you're getting close to $4,000 pretty fast. So from your perspective, the Apple Vision Pro, is it just a dev kit right now? Is there like legitimate use cases? Are there any apps you've tried for it that you feel like are already usable? Or to simplify the question, like what are the barriers for Apple Vision Pro specifically to become like a more ubiquitous headset, one that's like a serious player?
I will tell you a fun story. I think the best app so far out there for the Apple Vision Pro are actually two apps. One of them is the app from Gucci, and the other is Marvel's What If. Why do I say them? Many people figured out that one of the sweet points of the Apple Vision Pro is media consumption. You are able to watch your favorite Disney movie, you are able to watch your favorite game. There's a lot of different, if you're interested in golf, if you're interested in NBA and so on, there are pretty good quality applications for this. So this kind of thing, how it became more a media consumption device, is somewhat reminds me how the iPad started. The first version of the iPads, the first generation of the iPads, nobody figured or was thinking about this is going to be a real productivity device. They were thinking, okay, this is a nice device, nice form factor, very lightweight, nice screen, and so on to consume content. So for me, so far, many of the experiences I have seen are, and I actually liked on the Apple Vision Pro, are falling towards the media consumption. When I say media consumption, again, both of the experiences I mentioned are very interactive. So it's not like you are watching a movie, it's like you are part of the experience that you are there. So for me, the Apple Vision Pro, the capability of the actual chipset, the capability of the cameras and the displays and everything is actually breaking that particular barrier where I say that, okay, this is now a very good media consumption device. If I would be deciding whether I would buy a new OLED TV versus this one, which are actually not that different in the price point, I would say that a device like this might be the solution. At the same time, we know what is the biggest drawback here, that this is a single person device. If you have two person wanting to watch an OLED TV, that's having the virtual price for that TV. So that's one of the strange angles to look at it. At the same time, all these vendors I have been working with, and I worked with a variety of vendors, lesser known and more well-known vendors when it comes to the hardware, like Vario, HTC, Lenovo, and so on. Apple seems to be, next to Microsoft, one of the most open when it comes to what an enterprise really wants. And this is actually, for me, this is actually a good sign, because they are really trying to figure out what is going to be the killer experience, what is going to be the killer app, what is going to be the thing that actually sells this to millions or even billions to people on the spot through the enterprise channels, and then trying to get from the enterprise to the home users that way. And when I say they listen to the enterprise, I actually say it by experience. So I am one of the members leading a guild. This is a XR in Finance guild. We have quite a lot of members. Each of them are financial companies. And we actually reached out to Apple as a coalition of these companies. There were a few companies who didn't sign the open letter that we sent to Apple. A lot of them signed it. And Apple was not just listening to us. We got an answer in less than an hour. And they actually fixed two of the issues we mentioned in less than a day. And the whole thing was happening on the week of WWDC. So anyway, Apple was very busy still. They listened to the enterprises and they jumped on fixing and looking at the problems that we raised. This level of focusing on the enterprises and listening to this, again, when it comes to these vendors, only Microsoft was the other vendor. Of course, Microsoft being I would say not always, but Microsoft being a very enterprise centric and very enterprise focused company anyway, with their other products, it was kind of expected that if I say, hey, I think the HoloLens should do this or that, they would jump on it and try to solve my issues. But it was a very, very positive surprise for me to see Apple being so much happy about uh, helping out the enterprises.
And I think most of the listeners or the community around this probably are aware of how crazy that is. But WWDC is like a flagpole event for Apple.
It
It's
is,
like the biggest
all
event
hands.
to
It's the all
announce
hands.
all the
All,
product updates, all
yeah,
of the software updates. It's where Vision Pro was originally announced. And when you're talking about $1 trillion company, a $2 trillion company, like the prep work and advanced notice to prepare for an event like that is a big deal. And to be making quick last minute changes to a product or making big shifts the week of an event like that is incredibly hard to do. Like that agility is not commonplace for a company of that size.
yeah,
So it's really impressive. I think what's interesting to me about that is like you have this community, right? Like it's a group of leaders from the enterprise, specifically in finance, that come together and voice opinions as a group. So there's a few things about that that are interesting. One, I think that there's a power in getting to great ideas by having that community in the first place, like having that network of people sharing thoughts about it. And then two, like sharing that voice as a group instead of
yeah.
competing with each other, but coming together and saying we all want better results. We want better hardware and software, right?
Of course, in some sense, these are companies who are competing. But when it comes to being able to make these experiences better, we are acting like for the whole humanity. We at least we that's why we feel like we don't feel like it's a unique selling point or a unique capability of one of the companies if we manage to arm wrangle a vendor like Apple into doing something. It should be coming from all together, the whole community saying that we think that doing this or that. And actually, we asked for some hardware changes, and even Apple was like, okay, these are interesting hardware changes for enterprise, something that they will start thinking about for the next version. And as I mentioned, some of the software changes they managed to squeeze into the Vision Pro 2 beta, which was coming out like 48 hours before we sent this in. But they're like, oh, yeah, some things we can probably squeeze into that release that's coming out in 2 days.
Would you feel comfortable sharing like anything that was on that list of the stuff that you guys were asking for?
Yes, for many. So when it comes to an enterprise, this whole thing about one user is using one device is not really going to scale in many of the cases. If you're an enterprise who are doing kind of trade shows, whether it's internal and external, you want people to be able to wear devices in quick succession, trying out an experience and everything. But even when it comes to the experiences you would have in a boardroom kind of access. The expectation today is that you go to a boardroom, you sit down, and you use the equipment there, the audiovisual equipment. And the same way you want to have sit down and put up the headset, which is in the room already. You want to walk into the room, pick up the headset, and get logged in and start working on it. You don't want to bring the headset in your hand or your head while you are walking to the boardroom. You want to walk into a room, pick up the device, and start using it. And this actually results in a lot of software related changes or ask but a lot of hardware related, because we want to make sure that the device is more flexible when being worn by multiple different people, when speaking about things like the different shields and light shields and so on, but also being able to clean it. You want to be able to clean the device very effectively and very quickly between uses. You want to have some kind of, yes, we do have these kind of things. I don't know whether you know this thing.
I've started seeing those become more popular at AWE this year. They were everywhere, like
Yeah,
having
yeah.
these
So I have my
disposable
own.
masks and stuff. Yeah.
So this is my own thing. I am having on me all the time. If somebody is willing to give me a headset, I'm like, give me a second. Let me put this
Well,
up. And I.
for anyone who doesn't see the video, just to clarify, it's
Oh,
like
sorry. Yeah.
essentially it's like a mask that you put on underneath the VR headset.
Yeah.
So basically, think about like COVID masks, but almost for your eyes. So
Yeah.
that way, it's a barrier between you and the device, so that it can avoid germs and sweat and things like that. Peter, I feel like you have an alternate life as a superhero, like that you could tap into with that.
I'm sure it's an alternate life. It might be my real life.
The side hustle outside of innovative technologies and investment banking. You're out there fighting crime. I love it.
You mentioned this, so and you mentioned that's an investment bank. So I actually do have an alternate life. Next to working at the investment bank and next to being a Microsoft MVP, MVP is a kind of ambassador role for Microsoft and about Microsoft technologies. I'm also an ambassador for the Linux Foundation as well. And as ambassador of the Linux Foundation, my area is actually emerging technologies like spatial computing. So I actually look at this whole thing from not just the investment bank angle, but also I'm working with places like the Open Metaverse Foundation, organizations like the XRA organization, and so on, to make sure that we have the open source solutions, the open solutions, the standardized solutions as well, because I do believe, again, as I mentioned, I don't think having one company having just the standard for this and not being able to share with it, whether we are speaking with the enterprise using it or whether the vendor providing it, I don't see the real value in yet, because you cannot really scale. To reach the billion user scale, we had to standardize, actually the verse standardize on iOS and Android. Yes, it's two things that they standardize it, but they had to standardize it. Before we had Android, the scatteredness of this whole platform and everything didn't really allow people to create an application and with some work having it in two OSs, but that's it. I was able to target now billions of people. Before that, you had to develop your application separately for the BlackBerry, separately for the Sony, separately for the LG, and so on. You know, you had to do this kind of thing. Why I'm saying it? Because I did it. So there were some apps I had to translate it to like 7 or 8 different headsets, each of them completely different OSs, completely different programming languages, and so on. And of course, the expectation was that the look and feel and everything should both adapt to the native OS, but also adapt to the application that we are porting. And it was it was a nightmare. So compared to that, being able to say today that we are down to 2 big ecosystem that you have to support is something I hope that will arrive to the headset as well. And actually, I do see it slightly happening. Right now, we are down to 3 major things. One is the iOS based, the other is the different Android based. And when I say different, we know that yes, although many of the headsets are based on Android, the differences are sometimes very significant to you able to port applications between. And of course, we have the Microsoft HoloLens, the Microsoft-based technologies as well. The good news is we have some companies, Unity, Unreal, and so on, are able to make solutions that are able to cover all of these parts of the ecosystem with one solution. So we are not as bad, but at the same time, we don't have that kind of thing. So in my mind, yes, we don't have the killer app yet, but we don't have the transparent ecosystem yet as well.
And in addition to the couple you listed, I mean, there's also Meta OS, which Zuckerberg's talking about opening up, and then there's Snapdragon Spaces, and there's like a wide variety of these. And I think you're right. Like I've talked to a lot of these innovation teams around consolidating and standardization around OS system or the operating systems is really important. Like not only for getting more innovation in hardware faster, so we can get better devices, but also so people can build on each new device much quicker as well. I want to zoom out a little bit though, because earlier you had mentioned your role with the Linux Foundation.
Yeah.
And the Linux Foundation is very interesting, right? It's a nonprofit that supports development of open source projects. Maybe you could share just a little bit more background on the Linux Foundation as a whole, and then we can dive a little bit into the work that you're doing with them.
Yeah, so one of the misunderstandings with the Linux Foundation starts from the name. Many people see Linux Foundation and they are like, oh, they are doing things for Linux. That's it.
Actually, I gotta say, I legitimately thought about that before I started doing more research into them.
Yeah, so they are doing everything from automotives, which sometimes do have embedded Linuxes, to space shuttles, which sometimes do have embedded Linuxes, but they do a lot of things for Windows, for Mac, and a lot of other parts of the ecosystem. They do things with hardware, they do things with software, so it's a very wide range of set of things. What I usually point out, it's when we say the Linux Foundation is actually a large number of smaller foundations that it is made of. Some of them are focusing on quantum computing. Some of them are focusing on spatial computing. Some of them are focusing on financial service companies. Some of them, some of them are looking at from the technology side and focusing on embedding system. Some of them are focusing on topics like healthcare, so healthcare systems. So it's actually made of a lot of smaller foundations, and those are actually forming it the bigger one. And yes, as I mentioned, the name is misleading because it's clearly not just Linux. It's actually a much bigger part. To give you a fun fact, Microsoft is one of the biggest contributors to the Linux Foundation.
Which makes sense, right? Like, I mean, Microsoft's business model with competing with Apple with personal computer was all about opening it up, right?
Yeah.
Like let people build their own PCs, let them build a variety of different software applications. Like Androids back in I used to be Android before, now I'm more of an iPhone user. But part of what I loved about like my HTC back in the day is it was like I could customize anything. I could completely
you could do
change
whatever you
the whole
want.
system, right? And that was a lot of fun.
I mean,
And I think
you could get yourself into a hole where it was very hard to come back from, and you had to like restart the whole machine, whole device, and so on. But it was still worth it. You could customize everything. Where it comes to Apple, you get the very smooth experience, and this is actually something I really like the Apple device. The whole experience is smooth. There are no rough edges. Versus, I am comparing it to some other devices running of some of the other OSs. Yes, there are sometimes rough edges. There are applications where changing between them is the screen goes blank for a second and these kind of things. You don't have these kind of things with the Apple device. You have this whole smooth experience. There's no kind of issues like this, you know?
So I have a question for you on this idea of open source and interoperability, standardization. Like all of these are kind of overlapping topics, I think. And when people talk about interoperability with 3D world building and objects, like a big kind of piece of friction for that is that there's misaligned incentives where people think interoperability makes a lot of sense, but then each platform is incentivized by keeping their platform sticky in a walled garden where everyone spends time in their platform instead of someone else's. And so there's this incentive to keep them not standardized and try and kind of gate them into being their own things. But then there's also a benefit to standardization because you can optimize workflows and everyone's building on the same foundations. So from an enterprise perspective, like how do you see balancing that incentive to try and keep your product as sticky as possible and can maintain a competitive advantage with that idea of open source and standardization? Like how do you balance those two ideas?
You mentioned something about you moving from Android to iOS-ish, and I want to go back to it, and you will understand in a second why I'm saying that. My company and many of the companies I have been working with are big believers in what we call BYOD, bring your own device. What does it mean? If you are willing to give up some of the features and allow us to track you and wipe your phone and or iPad and so on, you can install the company app store to your device. And from that point, your personal device becomes part of a work device. It's going to be up to you how you are splitting your work life and personal life on the device and so on. When it comes to spatial computing devices, in some way, they are not that much different than a mobile device. I mean, going back to Google Cardboard is literally a mobile device glued to your eye.
Quite literally, like that's exactly what it is, right? Like just slide it in, it's right in front of your face.
But if I look at a Meta device or I look at an AVP and so on, in some way it is a mobile device. Yes, it has a lot of other things in it, but your mobile device do have a lot of other things in it. It has proximity sensors, light sensors, and so on. Yes, your headset have different sensors when it comes to this. But when you approach it from this angle, it's not that much different than a mobile device. So why do I say it and why I figure it's important? If it's not that much different than a mobile device, you can look at it like, okay, what if instead of me trying to schedule a particular vendor's solution, hardware solution to my employees, I say that if you do have a device at home, you can bring your own device from home. That means that I still have to adapt my company store and my applications that the people wants to use, whether it is enterprise applications like Microsoft Office or Citrix and this kind of thing, or whether it is the business applications I do have for trading and so on. If you are a financial company, or if you're an FMCG, some kind of ERP software and so on, you still have to adapt it to the iOS platform, the Android platform. Might be more than one Android platform, the Snapdragon platform, the Metaverse platform. Yes, you still have to do it a few times, but compared to that, the fact that you are not needing both to, of course, pay the devices for the people, but also not having them to have multiple devices. I mean, no one likes to have more than one phone. Who wants to have more than one headset? If you have a headset at home for gaming, probably you don't want to have another headset at work that you are bringing to and from, because you sometimes work from home.
Is there an issue with on the enterprise side? Because I hear about this constantly, right? Like when launching these programs, like device management is one of the biggest hurdles, right? Like MetaQuest for Business is improving. I think they're also doing a good job of kind of listening to companies and
also opening their platform. So Meta is putting a lot of
opening their platform, and then you've also got young startups like ManageXR and ArborXR in the space, and there's a lot of people out there trying to solve this device management problem. But when it comes to that idea of bring your own device, do you think that there's a security risk, or like what would be the reasons not to be able to approve a program like that? Because I imagine the enterprise wants control over like what apps people have access to, right?
I mean, the same way as getting the company app store on your mobile phone, you need to prove that your phone is not jailbroken. You have to prove a lot of things. It has to be on a particle level of the OS, a particle security settings has to be on. The same would apply to devices like this. A good example here is Microsoft Intune. Microsoft Intune is one of the MDM solutions. The benefit and the drawback of using Microsoft Intune is actually the same. The device just looks like a device. You cannot say that, okay, I want to push out this application to that headset and start it automatically up for that person, because it only sees it as a device. It can track where it is, you can wipe it, and a few more features, but that's really it. It doesn't understand the kind of device you are having to the level to do it. And there are companies like ArborXR or ManageXR who are approaching it from the different perspective. They might be smaller startups, they might not have that level of enterprise integration, but they do have all the features when it comes to this headset and everything, and you are more or less getting your own enterprise portal with custom apps and so on. And my answer to this question is actually the two kinds of people who would use the headset at a firm. What do I mean by this? There are the level of people who are not buying their own mobile phone and setting it up. They are going to get a white glove service from the firm that they are working on. Somebody will show up and set up their phone for them because that's their level. This kind of people, they will have the same level when it comes to the headset as well. Somebody will show up, they will get a firm branded their headset from the firm, which will have all the best and greatest remote management platform to be able to make sure that that person, when that person needs to use the headset would be working, it would be charged, it would be there, the right software and versions would be there. But for the large number of the people who are lesser important in some way, having the lesser level of device management might be just okay.
This makes sense to me because at Arthur we almost exclusively work with large global companies, and when we're kicking off these programs, like there's pretty intensive cybersecurity review processes and procurement that we tend to have to go through, and certain use cases require like extreme levels of approval, right? Like if you're having a team come in and doing like agile workflows and they're integrating their Jira board, like there's some pretty sensitive information that they're going to have in the platform. So there's a level of clearance you have to get before you can do that, and that's very white glove and very managed. But then there's other use cases that are more like onboarding new hires or like more team building workshops and things that don't require quite that same level of security clearance. It's more just making sure it's scalable and that it's going to work and that it's a good investment. And so you have two different kind of onboarding processes for that. And I imagine with the devices, it's similar. Like you have a certain set of use cases that can probably be a BYOD type of a process. And then you've got another set of devices or use cases that just need another level of management.
Yeah, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
You know,
I think that's a good.
you know,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
you never want to annoy a managing director by making their home device something goes wrong.
Yeah.
And these kind of guys, these high level guys, probably they wouldn't have a problem having two devices. Actually, probably they won't have a device at home. Their kid or their grandkid might have a device at home. These are usually, I mean, this is very funny. I don't know whether you are ever seen the work index surveys from Microsoft that they are.
Not recently.
So every year they produce this work index, which has a lot of different questions and interesting discussions and everything. And in the last few years, especially since Microsoft released the HoloLens, it has a section about spatial computing. What a surprise! So they actually have a very interesting chart that each year they produce, which talks about how much percentage of different generation, going from generation boomer up till the latest generation, to how much percentage of them can imagine working in using spatial computing technologies. And, the boomer generation still stagnating around 8%.
It's interesting. What's funny is I think that there's a pivot that happens when people retire that changes this a little bit. Because I was really surprised to see that like there's this whole Silver Surfer gaming community. Where it's like people in retirement homes actually play a lot of video games, and a lot of them have started exploring VR because they have all this time on their hands. But if you go a step below that, right, where people aren't retired yet and they're still working and they're still so focused on their day-to-day tasks, there's this big resistance to change, right?
So it's very interesting. So, you get very old, you are happy to use it. You are young, you're happy to use it. And there's like a kind of dip in the middle. And this dip is, we need another 30, 40 years for this dip to go through the system. And everybody would be the young people who wants to use it. Do I want to wait 30, 40 years for spatial computing to become mainstream? No, I wanted to have it faster.
So what are you for that generation like that? Because most of those people are the budget holders, right? The folks that can fund these programs and like ultimately decide whether to invest a lot into building the program or not. What do you think the biggest barriers are for them to adopt VR or say like that is worthwhile for me?
I have a funny word for this. I call it the ridiculousness factor.
Okay, I gotta know what that is.
So you are in a trade show, whether it's an internal expo or summit or some kind of thing. You are in a trade show, internal, external. There's 100 people lining up to try one of these experiences using a headset. Will a CEO stand in the line? Most likely, yeah, because he's interested to, or he or she is interested to understand what this hype is about and want to try that device. Will that same person sitting in their office put on a headset like this? Most likely not, because they would afraid somebody would come into their office and see them wearing this headset. So this kind of group hypnosis, when you are at a trade show or when you are in a situation that everybody is going to wear the device, you are not the only one who might look ridiculous, because they are afraid the same way as there is this generation of people who are not really willing to use a mobile phone because they are afraid they will make something wrong with it.
This is interesting. You're only the second person to say this to me, and I think it's really valid. My buddy Sid at Miro, he does their executive briefing program, so it's more like in-person workshops, and they have a few VR headsets there. And I think it was back with the Quest 2, so before pass-through became really popular. The biggest blocker to get people excited about the VR programs is like when you're putting on a headset in front of like 5 other people that aren't wearing one, you feel like you're being stared at and like it's really silly and people get really insecure. And so I think that's actually one of the biggest impacts of the Quest 3 and the Apple Vision Pro and the VRX,
I mean, Apple
HTC
Vision
Elite, like
Pro.
having that pass
So you,
through
not only
makes
that,
it a
the
lot
Apple
more
Vision
comfortable.
Pro, the Apple Vision Pro added that feature, the eyesight, which looks
What do
a
you think about eyesight? Because I keep hearing mixed reviews on this.
So it's a gimmick. It's working. So technically, it's working, especially after the beta 2, the Vision 2 beta. It's actually working pretty well. It's performant. It does what it needed, and interestingly, does alleviate some of these ridiculousness factors things. If somebody sees that you were wearing it and they could see still your eyes, they wouldn't feel that much ridiculous when they are going to wear it themselves. Yes, the device should be a slightly smaller and everything in the scale and everything. And I'm not speaking about. I mean, I would love to have the whole thing in the Meta Ray-Ban or X Real Air size.
Sure. Yeah, like we all want it to get there, and eventually maybe.
Eventually,
we'll
I
keep
think
getting closer.
we're getting closer and everything. What's interesting, I have a huge trust in 6G.
Okay.
So as part of the Linux Foundation work I've been doing, we are looking at a lot of things relating to 6G, which is going to be the next generation after 5G. So
so quick pause on
because
that. So
because
when we talk about
wait. So our hope is that we can push more and more part of the calculation of the device into the cloud.
So with 6G though, you're talking about like the mobile network, right?
Yeah.
Like so being able to move around with it. I think we're a little early for that personally. Maybe we have different opinions on this.
Oh, very early.
The way I see headsets today is I see them as like not the equivalent of an iPhone on your face, but like more like a MacBook on your face, right? Like it's more like a desktop, or sorry, not like a desktop, like a tower, but like more like a laptop.
Yeah.
So I could take the headset with me to a hotel room or to a coffee shop or something, but I'm not going to be wearing it on the way to the coffee shop. More likely than not, right? Like I'm going to probably set my stuff up at the coffee shop and then put my headset on at the table, the same way I'm not walking around with a laptop like
so
typing on my keyboard, right?
So once I was wearing Apple Vision Pro in a Starbucks, I did get strange looks.
Oh yeah, I tried an experiment myself with this, where I was at the airport, and this is before Meta put in travel mode, so it was actually kind of a disappointing experience trying to watch a movie on a plane and did not work very well. But in the airport, it was pretty cool. Like I was sitting here watching the Surf's Up, the movie about penguins surfing. Really uplifting, fun movie. It's like one of my guilty pleasures. It makes me smile. But I'm like sitting down, and before I press play on the movie, I just sat there and passed through, and I just kind of people watched and was like, how are people looking at me right now while I wear this headset? And it was weird. It was very uncomfortable, actually. I want it to be more normalized, but I gotta say, like, I definitely felt that ridiculousness factor you were talking about.
But if you would be wearing an X Real, an X Real Air 2, for example, people wouldn't not. People probably wouldn't even necessarily have spotted if you are not picking up the bright red colored one, which I really like the color, but it's very unique color and everything. So, if you were wearing the black one, people wouldn't even necessarily have spotted that you are using something else than the, yes, there's a wire dangling here, but they might have thinking you are listening to something, or, it's not that obvious.
No, I totally agree. But what's interesting about that experience is I felt very insecure, I think, because of how public the environment was and like how out of place it felt, because it's just not normalized in those environments. But when you think about like a remote worker in their home office, or even an in-person worker like in a physical office space, if it's positioned as like a tool for work, I feel like that ridiculousness starts to fade away a little bit, right? Or how would you go about kind of combating that?
I think first we need the killer app. We need that app the same way as for the mobile phones. First was, I remember when the mobile phones, the first banking apps came out, and you could check your balance and make send money by walking on the street. I was like, okay, this is it. This is going to be the killer experience that's going to change the world and everything. It didn't. Still you use it and everything, but it wasn't the killer experience. For me, it was like, okay, I never have to go to an actual branch office ever. because I can check my thing, check whether the money arrived. I don't have to see text and things like this for this information. I can see everything live. I can even dispute a credit card charge. Yeah, I could do everything from the phone. For me, this was the thing that, okay, now I am fully mobile, or I am fully able to do these things. And it wasn't. It turned out to be that wasn't the breakthrough or anything. The breakthrough actually, in some way, was media consumption and media creation. Creating TikTok videos of yourself, watching TikTok videos, this kind of thing that actually somehow broke the real barrier. That's why I am looking at the Apple Vision Pro, and I am looking at this whole media playback and media use and everything, and actually media recording. So I don't know whether you ever tried an Apple Vision Pro and the either if you use an iPhone 15 or you are using the Apple Vision Pros or own ability to record 3D scenes and playback. That experience is insane.
The memories, right? It's like literally a window into the past, and to be able to see that is really cool. So this is something that's been coming up a lot lately. So I've been going back through some of the old podcast episodes from early MetaRick, like a year and a half ago, and there's this example that was brought up in 2 episodes with Adam Kyle Wilson from Polyform Studio and with Mo Husseini from Gensity Labs, and they both talked about this idea that content mediums change and they take design principles from old mediums when they first get started. So the example from Mo at Gensity Labs was about television, where when it first started, it was basically just plays with a camera. And we didn't actually have cinematic television. It was just literally theater, but broadcasted to the world. And then we realized, like, oh, we could put a camera on both sides and cut back and forth. Oh, we could put a camera right in someone's face and make it really intimate. Like, it's a whole different medium.
And then you can do VFX.
And then we can layer in more. And Adam had the same feedback, but about graphic design and making print magazines versus digital websites. And like now with digital websites, we open new doors where you can add videos and movement and GIFs and things like that. And so I think with VR, we're in that stage where we're just doing a lot of 2D cutouts of MP4 files. And the next wave of it is like, what are the new design principles in a VR environment?
So I have a comment on this. I guess probably I have to explain what is the difference between zoomorphic designs and neuromorphic design a little. But zoomorphic designs, think about those early time of the iPhone when every app tried to look like the real world. You had a diary. It actually looked like a diary. You use a notepad app. It's actually look like a physical paper, crumbled, everything you were writing on it. You could turn the page. It visually shown how you turn the page. You look at applications today on the iPhone, all of them are, or 99% of them are now neuromorphic, which means that they are not trying to mimic the real world anymore. They are actually trying to come up with new ways of doing UX. They are trying to do new ways of reinventing the interaction patterns and so on. And I think the same happening with spatial computing once again. And that's where actually it becomes funny. So I'm speaking to a lot of graphical design companies who are trying to create neuromorphic applications for these spatial computing devices, and they fail. Why? This whole experience is still very new for the people. If you are trying to do something in the headset which is not trying to mimic the real world, your brain still reacts like, oh, something is fishy, something is wrong.
It throws people off. Like they need this sense of familiarity, right? Like something that makes them feel comfortable.
And one of the things that's familiar to people is 2D screens.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other interesting thing about that is I think this is a mistake a lot of people make with like 3D data visualization. Like Simon from an agency called Cora was talking to me about this, that like 3D visualization is really valuable for certain things. Like if you want to heat map a room and like see data in a 3D space, that can be really valuable. But if you're just taking like a 2D chart and making it 3-dimensional, it's actually harder to read. Like if you talk about like financial reports and investment banking, right? Like we've gotten really good at reading 2D charts and reports. And so we don't want to just abandon that medium of communication. Just like with phones, we didn't abandon text formats, right? We just created new tools for how you can format the bullet points and bold things and highlight them. And like, it's just slightly different than paper. But we're still taking the same medium of communication and just evolving it, right?
Yeah, or kids might be only communicating in emojis with each other, but yeah, they still, yeah, text is there and everything. Um, I've been working with a company. They are called Flow Immersive. They are doing
Oh
data
yeah.
visualization, 3D data visualization. They are a very interesting company. For me, the reason why they are interesting, they actually try to tackle the exact problem you mentioned. Moving 2D data, even slightly 3D data to 3D space, is not really giving you an extra value and everything. What they did and they are doing, they're actually adding AI. So being able to 3D manipulate the data with your voice or with your movement, with your voice, being able to say, I only want to see the outliers. I only want to see the outliers where the color was green. If you're in a sales process or something, these kind of things that you are able to not only see the data, but even manipulate the data in 3D is, I think, where the real value is lesser. This 3D visualization is the ability to manipulate the 3D visualization. Just being able to put the 2D information into 3D form, it's not really giving you the extra value. I was working with a company a long time ago. They actually did a very interesting 3D visualization concept. You could put the 3D data in. You actually got a cube that you could turn around it, show the data. Then you could physically grab a slice, take out the slice, and even multiple slices, and have those slices floating in front of you, and you could pinpoint them and ask about points and everything. So
That's cool. See
exactly.
that's really interesting because like that's like changing the way you can share ideas about the data, right? Like it's actually adding a piece of value. It's not just hey, look at this data in a fun, playful way. It's which sometimes that in itself is interesting. It gets people to engage in playful energy. But
We are actually slowly inching to my killer idea. What is my killer project?
I gotta know. I gotta hear it.
So my killer thing that's missing, and I know it's what I have to explain because first it sounds very funny. PowerPoint. We need the equivalent of PowerPoint in this space. And when I say the
Yes.
equivalent of PowerPoint, I really mean the equivalent. What is PowerPoint about? PowerPoint is about there's someone who is driving the experience. There's someone who is changing between slides, and there are people who are watching it. And they can annotate it, they can talk about it, and so on. And that person also talks about it, who is the presenter. This is what PowerPoint is. Yes, it might be slides, it might be present. It's different vendors have different solutions for this, but more or less the whole experience haven't changed since this whole slide idea has been designed. Actually, if you think back 40 years ago, you were putting those foils onto the projector. It hasn't really changed since that. This spatial computing thing that we are having today is a way for us to change this experience. Instead of you having a 2D image, instead of you having even a 3D image, you would have experiences. One experience might be a map where things will show as small icons and you can take an icon and look into a factory and see how things are happening. It might be a 3D chart, but then you can take a copy of your chart and start interacting with it and get additional data of it. Each of these experiences can be bespoke for what is happening there and how it is happening. So my killer app is the spatial version of what PowerPoint is or what PowerPoint can be. And there has been some startups who got close to it, but they either failed and not existing anymore, or they pivoted. So there were companies like Glue or Spatial IO and so on, which did had this kind of approach that you had a wall that you could do this storytelling and with this experience and everything, but then they later in pivoted, or in case of Glue, they have gone bankrupt. So
Well, I think that I mean I don't want to be self-plugging and shilling too hard here, but it seems like Arthur is relatively aligned with some of what you're talking about.
I didn't wanted to say it. I wanted to leave it to you. So Arthur, the reason I know you is because you guys have something that might fit this kind of issue, that might be a solution for it and provide a kind of experience which in some way or the other might be similar to what spatial neuromorphic reimagination of PowerPoint experience could be.
So I mean, obviously, I can talk about Arthur for days and days, but from your perspective as someone who's seen the tool like a couple years ago and then
Yeah.
seen it again recently and experienced all of these other tools, right? Like you've tried so many different
Oh yeah.
platforms. What are some of the things that you think stand out about Arthur that give it a better shot at becoming that kind of killer app that you're looking for? I know I'm totally baiting you for a shill here, but but I
No.
want to hear your take on it.
In Arthur, what I really liked is actually the joining experience is clearly something that many companies doesn't have. Many companies, the whole, hey, I want to join a space and I want to be invited to a space and I want to be it. That has to be frictionless. That has to be immediate. That has to be something that you don't even have to think about it. That's something I really like in it. The other big thing I like in it is, I don't know what's the exact name of it, that experience when there's a lot of objects, you can even go to the next page and everything and pick, and
Oh yeah, the tool tables. So
tool
there's
table.
like
Sorry.
preset shapes and emojis, and
Yeah.
kind of like on a keyboard on a phone. Like you have preset like symbols that you can use, right? But
So
instead they're 3D objects instead of a
so
2D.
yeah, that thing. I mean, I always have ideas what additional objects to add to it, but that thing that I'm able to just pick up and express something. I can. I know it sounds crazy, but I can throw a smiling head to someone.
Yeah, totally. And honestly, like that's I don't know how soon it's in the roadmap, but that idea of having your own custom
Yeah.
assets on the tool table is interesting, right? Because like we do that in Slack, right? Slack lets you create custom emojis
Yes.
where for culture that's huge. Like people always take screenshots of someone's face and use it as an emoji reaction
I,
on things. And one of the funnest
I
activities
did it too. Yeah.
because with Arthur we use it internally all the time, right? And so like one of the most underrated pieces of it I think is just team building. And
Yeah.
so for Christmas last year we did a Secret Santa where basically everyone in the company came to the meeting with a 3D object that they found on like Sketchfab or our internal library or TurboSquid or whatever, and had to give their Secret Santa matching that 3D object. And
You see?
so you've got like hundreds of these objects and people sharing them with each other, and it was just really fun. Like it was something where everyone came out of that meeting feeling really pumped up and excited. So I think that what we're trying to replicate with those virtual offices is that sense of human connection
Yeah, yeah.
that you get from a physical space, the culture, and then to your point, the collaboration, how you can share ideas.
Arthur have this option that I can sit down, project my computer into the space and my keyboard and start working and really collaborate and everything. Why I cannot have a few objects on my desk? And this is the answer. I can. I can have a cup, I can have a tennis ball, and so on. I can make it mine. That
Yeah.
experience and everything.
I know we're kind of coming up on time, but there's one other topic if
Sure.
that we can take just a couple quick minutes on. Is so in your experience, like we just kind of talked about some of looking into Arthur as an example of this, but like you're looking into products and services and offerings all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like you're this trusted resource within your company where a lot of different teams are trying to solve problems, and they come to you to try and figure out like what are the innovative ways we can solve these problems. When you're vetting like what's real, what's just hype, like what is a worthwhile product or service offering, what's your kind of mental checklist? Like what are you looking for green or red flags?
Oh, I don't think there are red box. And the crazier the idea, it might be working. Again, this is a new area. This is emerging tech. This is things that no one ever tried before, or did before, or did. I did work with some companies who created such experiences in the spatial world that were not trying to replicate experiences that you have in real world, whether I'm speaking about radial menus, projections, back projections, and so on. That's I was like, okay, I don't have a use case for it, but this is the coolest thing I have seen in the day. The point is, again, this is like a kind of word fair kind of situation. I don't think any solution is better than the other. Any solution is more worth the money or the effort than the other. What is going to be most successful activation, what is going to be the killer thing, we haven't found it yet. I feel like we have been close a few times, but whether the pandemic or something else changed our perspective there, but I think it's going to happen sooner or later, and we would find those few use cases that would actually make the market. You know,
So it's
you
it
know,
sounds like what you're looking for is less about like a pickaxe that can solve this very specific problem, and
no,
more so it's like who has a grand vision that
yeah,
pushes the boundaries of what's possible with this new technology. And then if it but still, like, anyone can say like a really big vision, right? Like what would be your process of going, these guys not only have the right idea or the right path, but like they're worth working together or collaborating with on that path? Like, is there anything about the team or the product, or what sort of things stand out to you that make that a vision worth believing in?
clearly being able to think outside the box. When I say on the outside the box, when when a given device have a given capability, and you are able to prove that capability can be done better, easier, and so on. To give you an idea, Microsoft HoloLens, everybody knows the device, everybody knows these capabilities and limitations and everything. I met a company who was able to do sub-millimeter positioning and sub-millimeter difference telling based on reality versus the physical objects versus the virtual objects. And even Microsoft was saying this is impossible. Then came a vendor and they said, "Yep, I did it." These kind of things when they look at a thing, a limitation, and they instead of seeing it as a limitation, they look at it as a challenge, more like.
I see. So like seeing like if that were possible, it would be immensely valuable. Let's make it possible. Let's find a way
To
to
give you an
create that.
example, many of these spatial computing collaboration software says that, okay, you have rooms, each room can have 25, 50 people and so on. If you have more than them, you will have additional rooms. I'm waiting for the vendor who say, yeah, you can have 10,000 people in the room. We figured out how.
We should keep talking.
You know, you,
Yeah, but
if you get my point, I'm looking for, and the solution is not likely going to be like, I actually put 10,000 people in a room.
yeah, it's
It will be
showing that you're thinking about solving that problem in a
Yeah,
way
but
that could
it
work,
might be
right?
it might be the fact if two-person is looking at the same thing or was focusing at the same thing, I will put them into one virtual room so they can hear each other if they speak. If somebody was not really looking at the screen, the virtual screen, I will put it in a different room because that's not necessarily needed. So we don't know what the solution is going to be for a problem like this. How you can put 10,000 people in the same virtual room. And again, the solution is not putting the 10,000 people in one virtual room.
Yeah.
The solution is doing something else where you will solve a problem we didn't know existed.
Yeah, it's like thinking really creatively about the existing infrastructure and trying to find ways to work around the issue.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just snap your fingers and have that vision be created, but on the journey of going towards those solutions, you'll end up solving a lot of other problems. Last week at AWE, well, by the time this comes out, maybe 2 weeks ago, but when I met our CEO from Arthur in person, and this is something I think he's very good at that I was trying to learn from, is balancing grand scale vision of like, this is what the world could look like if we're really successful and keep on this path, and then bringing it back to like, what's the next step towards that vision.
Yeah.
And as you keep taking more and more steps, that vision might end up shifting a little bit, and like new information kind of changes what the grand vision is. But the reality is you kind of have to have both. You have to have this really big vision of what can happen, and then to keep taking steps. If you lose one or the other, it doesn't work. If you don't keep taking next steps, then you can end up getting scattered and make it nowhere. And if you don't have a grand vision, then your steps aren't big enough and you don't accomplish solving enough problems. So I think that makes a ton of sense to me. Peter, this has been awesome. I could talk to you for 6 hours. Like I think
I
you
can
just
come
have an
back.
immense knowledge in the space. But I want to be respectful of your time. I know that you've got a million and a half things that you're juggling. Where can people learn more about you? Is there anything that you want to plug or kind of share with the community here?
I have a blog, .netears.net. We will make sure it's in the notes. So that's where I am publishing a lot. And I am very active on LinkedIn. So if somebody has been following me on LinkedIn, probably that person is already, yeah. So I am posting a lot on LinkedIn. You know, Ricky, I know you are following me.
And I'm grateful for it. You share a lot of good thoughts and like updates and like some of the things that you talked about earlier in the show, like pushing Apple to make changes and things like that. Like you're very public about a lot of these things. And I think that's valuable for everyone in the space. Like it helps inspire people like me that are on the building side of like wanting to create great ideas or position great ideas. It helps people that are on the buy side that are trying to figure out how to navigate this really complicated industry. So super grateful for all your content and for your time today, and look forward to chatting more soon.
Yeah, looking forward. Thank you.
I'm Metaverse.